I grew up with watching cartoons in the 90s and even in the 2000s as a kid. I love looking back at those memories at times. I was born in 1989 and I loved to watch TV as a kid. Not so much as I got into my adult years, since I was into video games and other things. In 2019, I was visiting my grandparents from my dad's side who lived on a farm. The farm wasn't anything special, just your average barn with cows, sheep, pigs, chickens, and even a few horses. They also have crops to grow food and even have an electric fence around the property. I loved going to see my grandparents from my dad's side as a kid, because my grandparents from my mom's side abandoned her as a baby. It was due to the fact that they were on drugs and couldn't afford to raise my mother. So my mother was raised by foster parents who treated her like a kid of their own. As most foster parents treat non-biological kids differently from their biological kids, which is very unfortunate to happen to most of them. They're mainly using them for money, of course. I sadly didn't know or even met the foster parents from my mom's side, as they both died in a car accident before I was born. Now that with that background information out of the way, let's jump to the case of what this is about. While I was visiting my grandparents' farm, I was in the attic, going through boxes with my name on it. Since I was growing older, my grandmother kept most of the things that I really liked in the attic. I found a box in the corner of the attic of my old VHS tapes. They were not far from my grandfather's old dresser, so I decided to have a peek inside. As I opened up the box, I could see a whole bunch of VHS tapes that I watched as a kid. Most of them were TV shows that I grew up with, such as Arthur, Little Bear, Barney and Friends, Big Comfy Couch, etc. What I also did see that there were also a few VHS tapes of The Adventures of Spot. Most of you guys might know who Spot is. For those who never saw the show, I'll explain what the show is about. Spot is a puppy dog who goes on adventures with his friends. He learns life lessons and does a lot of fun and crazy things. I watched that show when I was a kid, although it has been years since I've seen it. I owned most of the VHS tapes of the show, including Spot's Magical Christmas Special. They're also based on the book series by Eric Hill, and I have remembered having the books as a kid. As I took the box of VHS tapes from my childhood into the living room, I decided to see if I could sell them for a decent, good price online. Since these tapes were rare to find, I could get away with just a decent amount of money for them. I headed downstairs to the living room with the boxes, so I headed over to my laptop and opened it up. Since my grandparents were sleeping in their bedroom, I ended up putting the ad for my old VHS tapes on eBay, hoping that someone would buy them for a decent price without ripping them off. As my laptop's battery was getting low, I plugged in my laptop by the coffee table in the living room. I then decided to leave my laptop charged for a while. So I headed downstairs towards the den, which is on the first floor of the basement. When I got to the den, I saw that my grandparents had a desktop computer plugged in. I headed over to the computer to boost it up. It was running on Windows 10, and it ran very smoothly. As soon as the computer was finished booting up, I logged in as myself on the computer. Since the desktop computer belonged to my grandparents, they have my profile on the login setting, so that whenever I came over without a laptop, I could easily log into the computer as myself, instead of being either grandparent to get in access. As soon as I got the Windows desktop screen, I saw a file titled Spots the Dog Episodes. I then clicked on the file just to see what episodes that my grandfather or grandparents have downloaded, so I could watch one of my favorite childhood shows. When the file opened up, I saw that all the episodes of Spot were on there. Even the Christmas special was there as well. I began to binge watch all of the episodes as well as the Christmas special, which brought me back memories of being a kid. After I watched them all, I noticed an episode of Spot, and there was another one. But this episode I saw something that I have never seen before, and was tempting to watch it. The episode was called The Adventures of Spot, Spot Gets Lost. I was confused. Seeing that I've never heard of this episode, I then remembered that my grandfather did some fan-made episodes, mainly just for shits and giggles. Kinda like adding South Park humor in a sense. Not to mention that I regret to state earlier that he was an animator for them. No, he didn't work on the Adventures of Spot show, but he did know how to animate certain TV shows very well. So I just realized that this episode must be fan-made one. Just to be sure it was fan-made and not a real episode, I searched up the episode on Google just to be sure. However, when I searched up the episode, there was no trace of it anywhere. Not even on the Wiki fandom page. So I searched up the episode on YouTube, but I couldn't find any trace of that episode on there either. With no luck on finding out if the episode was real or fan-made, I had no luck on finding out if it was a real episode. So it was most likely a fan-made animation that my grandfather had made. I decided to watch the episode. Since I was feeling that my grandfather made this just recently, I wasn't so sure on what the plot of Spot Gets Lost was going to be about. The intro began with the theme song started, but the singer wasn't the original singer, like the show always used. Instead, it sounded like a man in his early 30s singing the song, which went on fine for the intro. The episode song stated that the episode was about and was questionable. I can't still quite remember that song what it was about, but I will do my best to recreate it. Spot likes to go on a hike. He went hiking with his friends inside the forest until he strayed off the path, getting himself lost. After the singing was over, Spot just sat on the screen like he always did. When the episode's title comes up, saying the episode's name, and the scene fades to the episode, it starts off with Spot packing his backpack with food and other stuff. Spot was gonna go on a hike with his friends today, so it was somewhat made sense of what the episode was gonna be about. Spot, are you ready for your hike? Dad asked. I sure am, Dad. Did you make my lunch? Spot replied with a question. I got it right here, Spot. It's PB&J sandwiches. His dad then handed Spot a container of sandwiches. As Spot put the container in his backpack, his mom then enters the scene, kissing Spot on the nose. Are you ready to go, Spot? Mom asked. Yes, I am, Mom, Spot replied. As he headed for the front door of his house, he opens the door, and Steve the monkey, along with Tom the crocodile and Helen the hippo, were there as well. They were all ready to be packed up and ready to go on the hike, only to stop at Spot's house just to get him. The voices of Spot, Mom, Dad were so far different. The actors who voiced them are different actors. There's not to mention. Are you ready to go on our hike? Steve asked. Yes, I am. Bye, Mom. Bye, Dad, Spot called out to his parents. They soon shouted goodbye as Spot shut the door. As Steve, Tom, and Helen walked down the path from Spot's house, they soon passed by a few houses along the way. As soon as they approached the forest, it was a huge forest. Now, normally they wouldn't go inside the huge forest without their parents, but seeing that they were all together, it wasn't going to be a problem. Spot and his friends started to hike through the woods, seeing flowers and other plants during their hike. As soon as they came to a big open clearing, they all decided to have their picnic there. Anyone want to play a game of hide and seek after we eat? Tom asked. That sounds like an idea. I could be the seeker, Steve replied, as Helen got the picnic blanket settled. The picnic scene went out all very nicely, with the audio and quality of the video not changing at all. It was great to see Spot with his friends at a picnic. Spot even had a few of his sandwiches that his dad packed. After Spot and his friends finished their picnic, they'd all decided to play a game of hide and seek. Steve was the seeker, while everyone else hid. Spot had to run as far into the woods as he could just to find a good hiding spot. Once Spot had found a good hiding spot, he hid behind some bushes and waited. Once Steve finished counting and was off to find his friends, Spot stayed as quiet as he possibly could. As soon as he could see Steve, about 15 feet or so away from him, he so quickly and quietly moved further in to find a new hiding spot. As Spot was hiding behind a log, he waited for Steve to come and find him. However, after waiting for a long time, Spot began to feel very bored. He peeked out from his hiding place to see where Steve was, but to his surprise, there was no sign of him. Spot couldn't even see or find any of his friends, and he was all alone. "I give up! Come and find me, Steve!" Spot called out, but no reply came in. Spot then decided to head back the way he came, but as he came to the picnic spot, no one was there. Spot's backpack wasn't even there, so he headed off into the forest to find his friends. As he searched everywhere, he didn't realize that he went further and further into the deepest part of the forest. Spot can see trees and the sight of the forest before him. He hadn't recognized the woods at all. It took him a few seconds to process what had happened. Spot was lost in the deepest and darkest forest of the world. Spot was scared, like a child who got lost in a huge mall. Spot began to run everywhere in the forest to see if anyone could hear him as he calls for help. He called out to his friends and for his parents, but there was no reply. Spot then wanders off into the forest for a little while, until he hid near a ditch to where a small stream was. "I hope someone can find me," Spot whimpered with fright. He was scared of being all alone in the forest. He waited for a while, but it didn't take long for the sky to start getting dark. The sun was setting, and Spot was still in the ditch, scared as hell itself. He waited for a while, until he heard the sound of twigs and branches snapping. Spot was startled by the noise, so he thought that it was either his friends or his parents. If they had to be the case, they must have realized that Spot was missing, and they had headed off to find him. Spot got out of the ditch to look around. The sun was setting and it was the only source of light for him. However, Spot couldn't see anyone, as the sound of twigs and branches snapping were about 20 feet or so away. "Mom? Dad? Ellen? Tom? Steve? I'm over at the ditch by the stream," Spot called out, thinking his parents or his friends were out in the forest looking for him. Within 15 feet away from him, there was a giant 10-foot tall black figure. Spot looked to his right to see the figure. He didn't even know what this creature or figure was, so he was near to pissing himself. Spot thought that it was a bear in the forest, but that possibility had problems as well, as he could not identify of what the creature was. The light from the sun revealed to be a black figure to have red eyes. At first, Spot thought that it was a monster from the monster movies that he watched back at home. But whatever it was, it stood in front of him. I paused the episode to see the shape of the figure, and I got some visible shadows to reveal what this creature was. It was some sort of gorilla monster. It had black fur and fangs, and it was staring down at Spot. Spot looked at the gorilla-like creature and froze in fear. Whatever this creature was doing was staring at Spot. It let out some soft growls that sounded like a rabid dog before the sound of Spot's parents calling him can be heard. The sound of his parents calling his name scared off the monster into the forest, while it let out a roar as it ran off into the distance. Spot's attention soon turned to him and the sound of his parents calling his name. As he brushed the fear off of him, Spot turned around to see his parents about 10 feet away. So Spot ran towards his parents and cried into his mother's arms. "Mom! Dad!" Spot cried, hugging his mother. "Spot, we were so worried about you. Your friends told us that you ran off into the woods," Spot's dad said to his son. "Steve said that he couldn't find you. Your friends were looking for you, and when they told us that us about that they couldn't find you, we came out here to find you," his mom said. "I'm so glad you found me. I encountered a giant monster in the forest. It had fangs, black fur, and red eyes," Spot replied. "I thought it was going to eat me, but it took off when my name was being called." "Whatever that creature is gone," Sally said. "But what do you think it was?" Spot asked. "I was so scared that I couldn't even move." As Sam looked around the forest, he could not see anyone in the forest. All he could see were trees. However, he looked down to see a footprint in the mud, and it was the shape of a monkey's foot. From what Sam could make it out to be, he was confused as well as his wife and child, but they had no idea on how they could identify the footprint to be. All they could guess that it was some sort of huge gorilla or some creature. They all headed back to Spot's house. As soon as the scene fades to Spot's bedroom, Spot is in his bed with his teddy bear, all cuddled up to it. He lets out his usual 2 barks before the screen turned black. The credits roll normally, and I could see that there were some major changes. For one, the voice actors kind of sounded the same, but their voices were off-pitched at times during the episode. I could also see that the voice actors were played by different people, which is why I can understand the voices of characters were sounding different. As soon as the episode ended, the director of the episode's name was someone who wrote the episode as well. I didn't know who it was, and it was no one that wrote any Spot episode I've ever heard of. The director and writers of the episode's name was Amelia Lockhart. I have never met anyone named Amelia Lockhart, nor that I have ever known anyone by that name. So I had to ask my grandfather some questions about the episode, amongst the others that I needed to ask him. The next morning when my grandfather and I were feeding the animals, I had to ask him about the Spot episodes that about Amelia Lockhart and on who she is. "So, Grandpa, did you make the Spot Gets Lost episode with anyone named Amelia Lockhart?" I asked him. As soon as I said that, he turned his attention towards me. As soon as he faced me, his face was as pale as a sheet. "What are you talking about? My memory is so fading nowadays that I don't remember much shit," my grandfather said. Since he was getting close to his age of getting older, I had to explain the question to him again. Finally, he could spill out the beans. I went on the computer in the den and I watched a fan-made episode of Spot the Dog. The episode I watched was Spot Gets Lost. I'm asking if you made that episode with Amelia Lockhart. As soon as I asked my grandfather that question again, he stopped what he was doing and sat down on the hay bale. I didn't make that episode. Amelia Lockhart was a neighbor that used to work for this farm when you were only 8. She wanted to make a fan-made episode of Spot with me in the future, and she also explained to me about the plot of it all. I told her that it was a bit extreme and dark, not that I didn't like it at all, but since it was a fan-made, I had said to her that the creators of Spot show would most likely not air it. When I said that to her, she kind of had a mental breakdown over it. She did all the animation as well as directing and writing it, and she hired a few people that she knew to play the characters. That's why their voices were off-key at times. As soon as my grandfather told me this, I began to process who this Amelia person is. I then asked my grandfather if Amelia worked for the people who worked on Spot the Dog, but he said that she was a strange woman and that he wished he knew. However, she emailed him about the episode in 2017, when someone posted the episode on an unknown website. As soon as my grandfather downloaded the file, he still wasn't sure how I would react to it. Seeing the file that was saved on the USB drive on the computer, I also have learned that it was kind of based on how Amelia Lockhart was lost in the forest or the woods as a kid, until she came across a Sasquatch or Bigfoot. So that is how she got the inspiration for the episode. And that's why Spot's encounter with Bigfoot was similar to Amelia's encounter. But the difference between those two encounters, Amelia was hunting in the woods when she encountered it with her parents, while Spot was lost in the woods when he encountered it as well. I asked him if Amelia Lockhart was alive or not, but my grandfather said that he and her haven't talked to each other since 2018. That makes me still wonder a few things. Did Amelia made this episode just for views or something? I still wonder to this day why Amelia didn't show this episode to anyone, but that remains to be a mystery to this day. I also wondered how the episode was on an unknown website. Maybe it was from a site that I was not familiar with? I don't know. However, still to this day, my grandfather still has that episode that Amelia made, but hasn't seen or talked to her since. I am still curious about who she is, but I sure hope to find more information about her someday. But for now, I'm not willing to risk showing any footage to anyone about this episode, mainly because I don't want to get any copyright risks. I also hesitate to send a screenshot of anyone who asks about the episode, but I'll have to think it over. Maybe, just maybe, my grandfather can hunt for some more info, but about that, it is most unlikely gonna happen anytime soon.